Yet and still, yet and still, there was a farm near Abergavenny, where the farmer's wife placed apple pies, hot from the oven, onto the table. There were eggs in the hen house, warm to the touch. There's nothing like bombing to make everywhere look like everywhere else. Warsaw, Khan Yunis, Beirut, Cologne. Dust and wreckage, people stumbling with baggage, which is mostly a broken version of themselves. The greatest freedom is when you release the bomb and bank to the right, climbing steeply into absolute blue, at which moment it's as if your feet are planted on air and there is no earth as you rise and rise toward the sun. Number 17. Asked if H-bombs were safe in their silos, he said of course, and never to be used. Peace guaranteed by preparedness for annihilation. Outside, a song thrush sang. Primrose yellow its breast, streaked with brown. This unique wandering ape, landing on the moon, eyeing the deserts of Mars, how can it not trash itself? "We're here to bring you freedom and fucking democracy!" shouted across rolls of razor wire, separating his anger from that of the crowd. I don't know who I am. In the past I knew, but now I am unsure. My mother never was so, rocking her desire in her arms. The Usk flows past the town, as it always has done. The grey Usk, the blue Usk, the brown Usk, stronger than a strong man's arm, ripping trees from their sockets, slamming them into old stone bridges from Brecon to Llanellan. After the next war, the Usk will flow on, likely carrying the dead with the rest of its detritus. All action is bound to be harmful. It is devilish. That is why this world is evil upon the whole. So Axel Heyth. And lastly, at her funeral, the preacher said she was an unusual lady, then started playing violin, singing "We'll Meet Again." "Not bloody likely," Jeff muttered, as her coffin slid to the furnace. Governor Lafan's firm, extinct. Escarpment Cycad, extinct. Heenan Cycad, extinct. Blue Cycad, extinct. Pallotta Cycad, extinct. Wood Cycad, extinct. Yellow Fatu, extinct. Superb Cyanea, extinct. Galapagos Amaranth, extinct. Kalimantan Mango, extinct. My fingers are swollen at the knuckle, digits pointing in different directions, just like my mother, always my mother, a haunting out of the dust in her urn. He arrived at the back door with a battered pickup, housing a grindstone and his 5 or 6-year-old son. Did I have any knives to sharpen? I didn't, so I said no. "I'm desperate," he said. I could see this was so, and went to the kitchen, returning with a knife, which he sharpened. I paid him. It was the end of the day. I never saw him again. Humanity is in its final phase. We have surrendered ourselves, spilled out our minds into memory banks. Say we have friends we have never met. The malign prowl seeking to harm. Truth is falsified. The computerized voice says sorry, says thank you, but does not mean it. Says I love you, but cannot love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. It almost feels like we should take time to process that and not move on so quickly. So apologies for not having that kind of built into this structure. I mean, there's just so much there, and it's a rich and, yes, in places very dark, but so considered, so eloquent, and the tenderness as well of that poetry really, really comes across. And I'm seeing some really lovely comments in the chat. And yeah, that's a really nice place to put things. And we will have chance to come back and ask questions as well. Thank you, John. I'm going to introduce Robin. So I'll again share my screen so you can see this. Um, Again, Robin Thomas has done, I think, is this the fourth collection with us, and some collections with others as well. And another prolific poet, and also writes flash fiction and novella, and again, a writer of kind of great depth and precision and intelligence. And Robin also mentors for Cinnamon Press. So I know some of you here today have kind of benefited from that expertise, which is really lovely to see people here coming to support Robin today. The Doll's House Maker's Room, the detail in it, the small, sometimes devastating surprises, materiality, I think is something that runs through all of these collections today. And we're talking here with about tools and objects and things, that kind of thingness of life and the stories that things tell. Robin has a way with very, very supple language and this amazing observation of just turning a phrase and you get something that you completely didn't expect. He's also just a marvel of reference. Again, there's travel, there's film, there's the absurdity of human life, there's history, no doubt there's a lot of jazz. It's a confident, distinct, really honed and beautiful voice. Please welcome Robin Thomas.
Well, thank you very much, Jan, and thanks to Jan and Cinnamon for the book, including its marvelous cover. So thank you, Adam, for that. And thank you to all for coming. Now I'm going to plunge straight in, I think. And I'm sure that many of you are aware that the philosophical term epistemology means the study of knowledge, its nature, its scope and its limits. So I thought I'd write a poem about it. Epistemology. And newborn lambs are beautiful, and love is wonderful. That's simply true, we know. And transubstantiation is the case. Some know it's so, some know it's not. Your mother is a century old and cannot walk, has lost her mind. Now she has shingles. That tells you what you ought to know. And Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac began Jacob, and Jacob begat Judas and his brethren. And Judas begat Phares and Zara of Tamar, and Phares begat Ezram. And Salmon began Booz of Rachab, and Booz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed began Jesse. And rabbits begat rabbits, and mice begat mice, and flies begat flies, especially in Australia. And bacteria begat and multiplied manyfold, as did all the living things of the earth. Perhaps that's all there is to know. The hydrogenation of carbon dioxide may be the purpose of life. If so, it is so, whether you know it or not. And here's another small philosophical poem. This is a quotation from Aeschylus. Time brings all things to pass. The match flares and flames, burning the stick down to your fingers. In what? A second or two? Time causes it? No. Time sits idly by, counting. So that's philosophy done. And I wondered if you'd like a poem about punctuation. Exclamation marks. The world is full of them, in books, of course, and newspapers, and hate mail on X, formerly Twitter. But you'll also find them in speeches and pubs, and in instructions laughed at by dogs. Policemen love them, as do bouncers, Jobsworths, soldiers at checkpoints, and politicians burdened with self-doubt. School teachers use them when they don't know what to say. Receptionists, mothers of fractious children, and referees pepper their speech with them. Fundamentalists end their sentences with explosive ones. Football fans, park keepers, ticket inspectors. Whatever happened to question marks? So philosophy and punctuation, that's a pair of P's. So there might be a pet hiding in the next poem. World news. Do not trouble yourselves further, or spend sleepless nights, or search the nearby countryside of highways and byways, ditches, rivers, railway tracks and motorways, or pin up notices offering cash rewards, or write to your MP, or set up charities, or search for criminal gangs? No, Buster has been found safe. He was here all the time. So moving on, some of you may have seen the film Dam Busters about the bombing of dams in the German Ruhr in 1943. The part of the film I particularly appreciate is right in the middle. There's a peaceful scene where the crews of the bombers relax in the afternoon prior to takeoff for their dangerous night journey to Germany. Not shown in the film is what it might have been like in the Ruhr Valley the same afternoon. Before the Storm, The Dam Busters, directed by Michael Anderson, 1953. Red ball in an arc, a Chinaman or googly. The sun is at its height. A deck chair breathes softly. The breeze is like a lover's touch. Smoke curls, scent of tea, of chicory and acorns. Clouds are almost elsewhere. Goats tinkle, a klaxon hoots the end of day. The sun begins its slow descent. And sticking with World War II, this poem is based not on a film but on a painting by Edward Borden. The Spoil of War. Edward Borden, A Pontoon Bailey Bridge over the River Po near Ferrara, 1945. An army or air force to stop an advance or retreat, to lay a trap or disrupt supply because it was there or by mistake, has blown the bridge to pieces, which lie twisted and bent at lunatic angles or frothing and drowning below. But see the pontoon bridge, a bridge on boats laid alongside. See how the vehicles stream across, truck after grinding truck, tanks rattling and clanking. Where is it going in these last days of war, this mass of steel, fuel, shells and men? On it goes, over the bridge, to thread the hills beyond. The last two poems, or poems I've just read, might be called ekphrastic. So it's poems which are inspired or have some kind of origin in other works of art. I've got a couple more now I'm going to read. The idea for this poem came from a Paul Muldoon poem, and I leave you to work out who the main character might be. Cometh the hour, after Paul Muldoon, why Brownlee left. How he came and why he's here is a mystery even now. Before, they'd been a kind of normal, good, bad, and everything in between, but politician normal, if that's a thing. Then he turned up, shambling, his arms adrift, lazy, afraid, clueless, hapless, scattering lies and children in handfuls, speaking nonsense in a dead language. How it was he who brought us low is a mystery. And the starting point for my next poem was a poem by another Irish poet, Derek Mahon. Absolutely everything. After Derek Mahon, everything is going to be all right. Everything is going to be all right. Electrons will continue to be in two places at once. Agrobacterium tumefaciens will thrive in its trillions. Beetles will dominate the taxonomic tables. Rats, mice, voles, and squirrels will be everywhere. Human beings will continue their breeding frenzy. Species will come and go, come and go. Earth will continue to caper around one of billions of stars. Solar systems will whiz and galaxies progress in a stately manner at near the speed of light. Yes, everything's going to be all right, because although the universe will expand and expand, then contract and collapse into nothingness, it will pause, take a deep breath, and start all over again. And this one also references a poem. This one's by a Russian poet writing during what Stalin called the Great Patriotic War, and it's about translation, perhaps in more than one sense. On reading a poem in translation, Yevgeny Vinokurov, Missing the Troop Train. I will never access that night in the station, snow sidling down, trains roaring past, the kettle of boiling water already icing in the unholy night air. No, I cannot translate that into my study overlooking the garden. I tinker a bit, and it really is no more than that, on the piano. And my last ekphrastic poem is about possibly my favorite composer of piano music, who died ridiculously young. It starts with some of the components of all human cells. What is a Schubert? Nuclei, chromosomes, lysosomes, ribosomes, centrioles, cytoplasms, endoplasmic reticuli, 30 trillion cells of, responsible, among other things, for piano sonata in E-flat major D568, terminal syphilis. 3 poems to go. My wife Mary and I used to holiday in Eire, where her parents had come from. She still had loads of relatives there. They all had the same names, so it's difficult to tell who was who. But anyway, they were great times, and we were always made welcome wherever we went. But mixed with these positive emotions, I always had a slight sense, took with me always a slight sense of shame associated with the treatment of Ireland over the centuries by England. This poem relates how, or refers to how very unusually there were among the kindness and friendliness occasional negative notes. Relations. I'll say one thing for them, though. We're in the kitchen of the old farmhouse, all of us, Irish, English, English of Irish extraction, of Welsh. There's more tea than you can drink in the huge ancient kettle, sour bread, homemade butter. Except that the farmer is over by the window, talking to a neighbour, just a little bit too loud. Yes, I'll say one thing for them, they knew how to keep records. Is he blaming it on me? I wasn't even born. In service, school leavers at 14 is where I come from. But I am ashamed. Why? What of? The others are delighted to welcome us into their warm, comfortable kitchen, to ask about our lives, tell us of theirs, pour tea, push bread and butter towards us, making us feel we could stay forever. We found all this out through the Dublin records. Otherwise, we'd never have known what happened to them. This poem is related to an old photo I have of my mum and dad on a tandem bike. Tandem. Mum and dad paused on their tandem, look at me from over the road. Whatever they're thinking, they are photo happy, happy to be young, to be together, to be out on their bike, to be smiling at me, who is not to be born for 6 or 7 years, and is now getting ready to ride after them. And finally, a poem whose starting point is one by Keats. Wake, after Keats' Sonnet to Sleep. A briefcase left, a naked stroll, lost notes for a lecture in a buzzing hall. Feelings without attendant narratives, what flickers is ungraspable. Bats, foxes, planes, clouds, lives made and unmade, revolutions, tea and cake, a stately moon, eternal stars. I wake, it's day, you're still not here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robin. And yeah, the poignancy of that last line is just resonates on as somebody who knew Mary a little tiny bit. Thank you so much for that. The breadth of that reading, the breadth of the references, the wit. Thank you. We do have a very accomplished trio of poets this afternoon, and we're kind of continuing that theme of the materiality as I introduce Edward to you. Again, Edward has published 6 collections with us. He's also an expert on Wallace Stevens, and he's also a master of wine. There are only 417 of these in the world. I mean, it's an incredibly long complex. So if you're ever in China and you need wine, it's got to be, you have to look up Edward. China's a pretty big place, so maybe, narrow it down a little bit to Beijing. But it's really, really wonderful to have Edward amongst our poets. And we've been working together, as with Robin and John, over a long period, which always makes kind of seeing the next collection delightful. Edward is somebody who just moves the work on each time. I never know quite what it's going to be. He puts a lot of pressure on his work, and it's very, very carefully done. This kind of forensic gaze is absolutely wonderful. And again, there's a lot of inquiry in these poems. He really asks deep questions. Here, the materials move, botany, birds, spiders, rock formations. But what kind of goes through this beautifully structured 3-act collection of scenes, acts, aftermaths, is this materiality that links everything, the physical universe and how it's expressed, how that physicality becomes those abstract things like love and family history and the natural world, or just a cup of tea. Absolutely beautifully written. Please welcome Edward Ragg.
Thank you very much indeed, Jan, and thank you to both Robin and John for their their wonderful readings. Before I start, I also want to thank Jan and Adam personally. We've heard how long they've been running Cinnamon Press, facing many challenges, moving country, facing illness, surviving COVID, and they have nurtured so many wonderful poets and writers, and of course our writers themselves. So I do encourage you to purchase some of Jan's books. So there's a memoir and there's a few other publications on the site. I also want to thank Claire Dyer, who provided some insightful commentary for the book. She's a very fine poet and novelist herself, and I'm very happy that she's here today. So thank you also to her. I'm going to actually share my screen, if I may, partly because some of the poems in my book are to some extent visual. They require to be seen. I just want to make sure, though, that I'm not going too quickly. The other reason I wanted to share my screen is because of the front cover art that relates to the title of this book. So my new book is called Material Witness. Obviously, this title has a legal term, but I'm taking those words rather more literally, as Jan suggested, to think about witnessing life, materials of all sorts of kinds. And there are three poems in the book that relate to the famous painting by Velázquez called Las Meninas, which is in the Prado. There's a lot of threes in this book. As Jan mentioned, there are three sections: scenes, acts, and aftermaths, in which there are 10 poems. And there are titles of poems that repeat with numbers. So there are actually three poems in the book about Las Meninas. And just in case you don't know that painting, it is one that has conjured a lot of commentary as to who is witnessing what and what is going on in this famous painting, who is looking at whom, who are the figures in this painting, and so forth. And because I found myself writing a series of poems about Las Meninas, this was partly inspired not just by the original painting, but also from the 17th century, but also from Picasso's works in 1957, where Picasso produced over 45 different versions of Las Meninas and different figures in the painting. So I remember seeing this particular painting in the Picasso Museum in Barcelona. And as I started to write some of the poems in Material Witness, three of these poems came, and I thought, well, I'm not a graphic artist, but what would it be like to at least have the experience of trying to recreate Las Meninas? So my version of this, which is on the front cover, is called Las Meninas, Las Sardinas. The sardines are an oblique reference to a poem by Frank O'Hara called Why I Am Not a Painter, in which he visits the painter Mike Goldberg creating a painting called Sardines. And the word sardines is actually written into the painting. So maybe this proves why I'm not a painter myself, but I'm very happy that we were able to use this particular image for the cover of the book. So thank you to Adam for that. There are just two short quotations that are prefatory at the beginning of the book. One from George Oppen: "The self is no mystery. The mystery is that there is something for us to stand on." And Oppen wrote a number of collections, one of which, of course, is called The Materials. And then the other opening quotation is from an interview with Richard Feynman, where he had been talking about fiction and mythology without wanting to dismiss these things. He does nevertheless make the remark, those stories were great stories, but the truth is so much more remarkable. So that degree to which we can be endlessly surprised by what reality reveals is part of the book. So the first poem I'd like to read is called The Tap Dancer. It relates to my mother, and we've heard some poems today in relation to the Second World War. I found, or we knew about the photo, but there's a photo of my mother as a very young girl that has a Nazi stamp on the back because her father was incarcerated in Stalag 8B during the war. So this poem, when my mum was evacuated, she was having tap dancing lessons down in Brighton. And so this poem relates to her early life during the war, and also my father and their parents as well. So this is called The Tap Dancer. She must have heard the aeroplanes, Spitfires ranging, the Luftwaffe diving. My father's father, the fire warden, dividing the darkest hours from his days making DDT. Maybe her Swiss mother whispered lullabies in slow French, holding her. before their evacuation, her Irish father incarcerated in Stalag 8B. I have a photo of her as a girl with a Nazi stamp on the back, my mother. My father recalled bright-faced GIs breakfasting, so enthusiastically polite. How they'd throw kids sweets from their jeeps, candy they called them, before most girls and boys knew to brush their teeth. My father wept for those pearl-toothed men until his death. My mother remembered tap dancing and often said, I was always so lucky, so lucky. The next poem I'd like to read is called Diving Bell Spider. There are several species, I believe, of these remarkable spiders that can spin not just webs, but effectively bubbles that surround them and enable them to actually go into water and even hunt for things or survive underwater. So in this poem, which is a love poem, the diving bell spider becomes a metaphor for a romantic relationship. Diving bell spider. This is how I visit you, into our calendar blowing bubbles of air, my water-repellent hairs and long legs building the chamber of our love, so that, as we meet, we are not out of element, mating freely in the ocean's currents with even deeper passion than on land. I say you are my oxygen, but know the air we breathe comes from above. After making love, you comb your hair as I begin to write this poem, checking the integrity of our anchored space line by line. I will never let us drown, and we will eat your favorite seafood poached from the sea by my bountiful embrace. Somehow the fish never see us, not believing in miracles. For this is how we love, from the depths, in plain sight. There are a number of poems in the book that have a sort of sonnet-like shape, but are not sonnets as such. One poem that is very different, in fact, there are 3 poems in the book also relating to bowerbirds. And of course, there are different species of these wonderful birds who, as many of you will know, that the males put a lot of aesthetic time and effort into building the most attractive nests so that they can attract a partner. There's also a reference in this poem to the character of Fortinbras in Shakespeare's Hamlet, who, of course, eventually invades Denmark and is the last person to speak in Shakespeare's play. So this is the 3rd bowerbird poem. It's called Bowerbird 3. They say we are masters of the maypole, but what maypole has towers and corridors like this? The first bridge my grandfather built. His father buttressed the bower in his style, a bit far-feathered for my taste. My mother adored it, of course. I am the present golden incumbent, hoping you will glimpse a thoughtful touch at every turn, each little stone placed on the path to your perhaps throne, slightly larger than before, so I may appear even greater in your dilating gaze. One day my son will have the run of the place, fending off wannabe hoodlums with ridiculous crests, or perhaps some ardent youth, a latter-day Fortinbras, hot and of unimproved metal, stomping and strutting to his advantage, will lay waste to it all. But this is naught to me. There is always a more accomplished gardener, a world elsewhere. What matters is the hallmark of my touch, as you emerge, tracing everywhere the signature of our love. To say there's a world elsewhere is also a quotation from Coriolanus, who talks about this once he's banished. So the next poem I'd like to read, excuse me, is another poem that relates to things in threes. So in the different sections of the book, there are 3 poems in relation to Dante's Divine Comedy, which of course has 3 books, is written in terza rima, the verse form that is based on tercets, and has 33 cantos in each book, I believe. So this is called Inferno. There's some slightly unusual language or phraseology. The phrase at the end of the poem I had as leaf is a Shakespearean rhetoric, really, meaning to prefer something or accept something. And also the word portmanteau. A portmanteau can literally be a traveling kind of wardrobe, but of course it evokes portmanteau words. And in this particular part of hell, in the Inferno, there are certain portmanteau words I introduce into the end of the poem. Strangely, this is actually a love poem as well. So this is called Inferno. They say Satan is the heaviest thing. Nothing further, Your Honor, from the Empyrean heights beyond all space and time. God's Lucifer love boy, encased in globular, drooling stench. And I like the way the ghostly shades are more physical as we descend into the abyss. Corporal punishment, punishing corporally at its best. And Virgil Dante, quickening the andante of the Verga-staffed allegro of descent. Things here have a way of being fixed, if enticing pitifully the semblance of hope somewhere else between pieta and piety. I rest my case. Surprised I was even granted admission. With such a portmanteau of virtues at my back, I had as lief the podcasts at this one-stop motel were divided into two parts: sour, bitter, yearning, sweet. Love, they think there's no way out. Duck. That duck is a verb, not a noun, I should make clear, because in part of the Inferno, there are, of course, these tonsured figures who are like Catholic priests who are rolling weights around against each other in one part. So anyway, the last poem, not the last poem, the next poem I'd like to read is one of the Las Meninas poems, and this is Ladies in Waiting 2. It refers to the figure in the doorway in that poem and we're in that painting, and we're not quite sure if he's just arrived or is leaving or has a message for the king and queen who are being painted by Velasquez. This also refers to the end of Priests in Search of Lost Time, where Marcel, before he goes into the concert, trips on a paving stone and slightly comically holds his pose, neither sort of entering or moving. And this is at the point where he begins to reflect on being an extratemporal being. So this is called Las Meninas, Ladies in Waiting 2. Are they, as you stand there in the gallery, waiting upon the Infanta at all? I have witnessed them for so long, standing in the door. You might think I'd come to resent their presence, doting and vying, but I understand how compassion may serve as courtier to loneliness. Here I resemble Proust's Marcel, pausing in the pose of one who has only recently tripped on a paving stone, entering the courtyard of the grand house. Fixed in this pose, one foot on the lower stone, one perched above, in sight of the guffawing chauffeurs. But these ladies do not laugh at me. Not even the king and queen seem to see me. My extratemporal self towering in the doorway. But rooted here, I have heard the music before the concert begins, and the silence in the vanishing points of things. Before I conclude, and I know we're going to keep a poem for the end as well, I'll just read a few more that are relatively short. This is a poem called Sleep Talking. A lot of the sort of common language that people use when they sleep talk can be swear words or the word no. And I've discovered recently that I wake myself up by saying yes. I'm not quite sure what I'm saying yes to, but this is part of the background to this poem. It's another love poem called Sleep Talking. A million no's have puckered the lips of your sample sleep talkers. I wake myself by saying yes, or foil my gentle lulling into sleep by some unknown stab of assent. It is like falling in love without knowing to what the heart has already acquiesced. Perhaps much of life awakens to the miraculous exchange of presentient gifts. What we knew before narration, what Penelope knew before Odysseus returned, what Molly Bloom knew before retelling herself the story of her past, kept awake by memory. I can almost smell the perfume in her breasts as I begin to fall asleep in your scented embrace, only to find myself saying, yes, I will, yes. Those are famously the last words of Ulysses and Molly Bloom's monologue. So before I read the final poem, this is just another shorter poem from the aftermath section of the book. It's called Aftermaths of Showering. There is an unusual phrase further down the poem in the last few lines there, how your smile out Dagar's Dagar. This is a oblique allusion really to the part in Hamlet's speech to the players where he urges them not to out Herod, not to overact, and so this is sort of borrowed from there in a different artistic context. So this is called Aftermaths of Showering. I can see them even now, as my touch extends over mountains, land, and sea, wherever your bathroom may be, or jostling in the up and down streams of desire, your delicate right palm easing the steaming glass door ajar, if there is a door, your water-dappled digits encircling the brass handle of which, yes, for a moment, I am envious. For what shines more radiantly than your soaking hair? Though far away, I have been admitted to chambers of acutest intimacy, the droplets dappling each breast, the brushstrokes of trickles aquaveining your buttocks and legs. How your smile out Dagar's Dagar, whose bathers do not look at us, as you, beaming, smile up at me. Your eyes bright as water, your lips sunrise in mine. So I'm going to stop sharing at that point and then we'll come back a bit later, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Edward. It's just, they're incredibly rich, and I've seen them on the page a lot, obviously, but to hear them read, that brings them to life in such a different way. Thank you. We have heard a lot of incredible poetry there, and please do go and buy the books afterwards. At the very end, I'll come back to that code so that people can do that. We have an opportunity to ask Robin and John and Edward questions. So if anybody wants to, I think we're about 40 of us. So if you raise a hand rather than just jumping in, and I'll try to keep an eye on who is asking questions, or if you have anything that you'd rather just put into the chat as well, that's absolutely fine. But does anybody have a question for one or all three? Elaine's put a question in the chat there. Robin, I admire your work hugely, enjoys being reread. But how do you manage to make, whoops, it jumps, us readers feel safe and unsettle us at the same time? Okay, feeling safe and unsettled. I think there's an element of that in all, but Robin, you start us off. You're muted at the moment, Robin.
No, that's a tough one. But what I would say is if I achieve that, I'm highly delighted. That's great. I don't know. Maybe it's because I don't know. Maybe I don't use big Latinate words, that sort of thing. So maybe it's something to do with making people feel that I'm sort of sharing the same earth that they are, kind of thing. But I don't really know. But it's a very nice thing to hear someone say.
Thank you. John, do you think that's something that you do at all, safe and unsettled? Or is there a lean one way or the other?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
The question was about making poetry make the readers feel both safe yet unsettled. Do you feel that's going on in your poetry, or is there more a lean to the unsettled? Or
I've never really considered, to be honest. You write what is in you to write, and you don't think about what kind of response it may have. So the answer is I've simply never thought of it.
Robin, sorry, Edward, does that kind of chime with anything in how you write at all?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I similar to John, I don't, maybe this raises an ethical issue, I'm not sure. I don't feel a certain responsibility to make a reader feel settled. I wouldn't presume to be able to do that, for one thing. I rather like the way Jack Gilbert once talked about the poem and the reader, perhaps, which was to say it's a bit like a dance, and sometimes the poem is leading, sometimes the poet is leading, and there's a kind of chemistry going on. It's not something that I consider, frankly. I suppose I'm always thinking about ways in which potential readers might interpret a line or phrase, just as I am in creating it. Um, but I'm not really sure that I've ever had a sense again of wanting to make something. I don't think poetry needs to be a safe space, if you see what I mean. And that's possibly not exactly what Elaine is saying. I think when we come to read robust poems, we want to be surprised. We want to be, left breathless, right? We want to be changed in some ways. But maybe I can't speak for other poets, obviously, but maybe for other kinds of poet, this does matter. But to me, again, it's not something that's been part of my writing experience.
Brilliant. I'll stay with you, Edward, because George has also asked a question about what triggers a poem.
Yeah, I think this it's very hard to say, isn't it? I think in some cases you are triggered by quite active experiences. So, for example, I mean, seeing Picasso's endless renditions of Las Meninas really made me want to write about those paintings. And there's a poem in my last book, Vital Signs, which is about Anthony Gormley's wonderful sculpture of the Angel of the North, which is very close to my heart. So sometimes there are actual physical things that we're responding to, or as we saw with several of Robin's poems, you're what's being triggered as a response to either a concept or a poem or a painting, whatever it might be. I think, but we just simply don't know. I mean, I have a bit like Wallace Stevens. He used to write titles for poems that he never actually got around to writing. I occasionally have things incubating that I think I really at some point want to write a poem about X, and maybe it will come into fruition, maybe it won't. So I think it's very poem specific. What might trigger writing? Yeah.
Robin, how about you? What triggers them?
It's just again, it's a tough one, but I think the what I would say about it, I think, is that all sorts of ideas, I think, flow across all of our minds all the time, and every now and then one sort of stands up, and I think, yeah, there's a poem there, and
Mm.
I might be right 50% of the time, quite a high proportion really, and sometimes I write just a few notes and put it away somewhere in a metaphorical drawer, and it only becomes a poem after 5 years or something. That can happen. Other times, I get an idea, and I had one yesterday. I had this idea, and I actually wrote a poem in about 10 minutes, which is ridiculous, really, and very, very extremely rarely happens to me. But I think the main thing is that it's just somehow there is something that a little trigger that goes, yes, there's a poem here.
Yeah, I like what you said about sometimes one of them stands up because, yeah, I mean, the world is kind of coming in at us all the
Yeah.
time in a sense, and it could be like, there's a million things in front of you. Why that thing? And you're right about the mystery that we don't always know
Yeah.
why that particular thing triggers us. John, how about you? Where do the triggers come from?
Uh, well, the Australian poet Les Murray once said that the poet needs to know everything. And I think obviously what he meant by that is that you must be alert to everything around you because you never know what might trigger an image or might trigger a poem. It could be something quite trivial. And part of the excitement of writing to me is that you sit down with a blank screen or a blank piece of paper and you never know what is going to come, what might be the theme of the poem or the images which emerge in the process. So there's this sense of mystery in a way, and that I think if it's a poem which works, you after you've printed it out, you are surprised by it yourself, and with your conscious mind, you could never have actually written it, so that it comes out of this deeper part of oneself, and one simply doesn't know what aspect of life might be key to the emerging poem.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'm not sure if I'm accurate in thinking this, but was it Les Murray that said we do it for the trance?
It might have been, yeah. I don't know.
I think I heard that quoted some, and I
Sounds
think
like Les,
there
yeah.
is that sense of like, that, like you said, you're dropping out of that ego consciousness.
That's right.
If you don't kind of drop out of that, then you're done for, really. It's like that sense of getting into that other place of the
Absolutely, yeah.
mind that allows these things to emerge. And Claire has added a question about materiality. Is there a limit to what can be written about materiality? John, what do you think?
Um, I'm not sure what materiality means, actually.
It's the thingness, the substance, like, we're working
Hmm.
from the
Okay,
material
yeah.
world.
No, I don't think there is any
Yeah,
limit because the potential of a poet's writing is everything, basically. And you simply don't know what fragment of the materiality of your world is going to produce a poem or an image.
yeah, yeah. Robin, how about you? Is that what keeps us going? It's just infinite.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think, and I think there's a sort of limit. I mean, sometimes you have an idea, occasionally you think, yeah, there's a poem there, and then there isn't a poem there, or the one that you start writing sort of falls on the floor like like I don't know, like a pudding, and um, so I don't know. I mean, but I agree with what John was saying about that it's really it's kind of all about your unconscious, and you have to give the you have to respect and like in a way your own sub unconscious. And if you try to be too thinky about it and too conscious about it, it tends not to work at all. You end up with something which isn't a poem.
Yeah,
Uh,
no artifice. And
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Edward, materiality. I mean, your book is all about it. Um, is that infinity of it overwhelming?
Yeah, I think so. I'm looking again at Claire's question, and she was talking about what can be written. Is there a limit to what can be written about materially? So yes, this is about materiality, but materials in not just an abstract sense, I guess. Now coming back to that quotation from Oppen about, Oppen often says quite deliberately polemical things in his poetry. For example, when he writes, there is a music more powerful than music, which will upset every musician in the world, right? Or in that particular quotation, where he says, the self is no mystery. I think to a lot of people, the self, it's deliberately provocative in a sense. But then he obviously qualifies that by saying the mystery is that there is something for us to stand on. And that, so I think that there's not going to be a limit. Of course, we are limited in terms of what words can do, and words can become materials, as we were saying, in the printed poem or in book form and so forth. So I would say that there's not a limit as such. I don't want to get too abstract about it because we could talk about materiality all day. But I really felt because my last book, Vital Signs, was very much associated with the body. And the poem I mentioned earlier about the Angel of the North, it's simply called Angel of the North. There's a quotation from Anthony Gormley. There's a couple of quotations before that poem in which he talks about my body is the only material part of the universe that I can inhabit, like can actually exist in, and have that strange experience of what it means to exist in a material that we are absolutely at one with if we're healthy, obviously. So yeah, I think that there are limits, but I felt strongly after writing a book largely about the body that I should go out and see where these bodies exist in the wider material world. So no limit as such. And sorry, I saw Margaret's comment. If I can just briefly say, I need to qualify what I said about Gilbert. Gilbert was not thinking in terms of talking about a dance between the reader and the poem. That's not what he was saying. Actually, he was talking about how in writing a poem, sometimes the poet is leading and sometimes the poem is leading, and there's a certain kind of dance there, so that you don't feel you're reading a poetry that's telling you what to think, and that so in terms of how to interpret it, I think that's what he was referring to.
which kind of picks up the Keats thing of, we abhor poetry that has, that has kind of a design on us. And if we're trying to tell people what to think, we've already lost them. Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for really, really interesting questions. And one last question, or it's fine if not, but okay, we're going to ask. Oh, I think we've got something. What is the role of the poet today? John mentioned the political aspect. How do you see the role of the poet in the age of AI? Oh, let's not be in the age of AI. John, go on. You can speak to that.
Um, I'm not sure what the role of the poet is today. I mean, poetry is so marginalized in a way in the culture we live in. I've just finished reading T.S. Eliot, volume 10 of his letters, and there, as a publisher, he's continuously saying poetry doesn't sell, poetry doesn't have an audience like it used to be. And these are, we all know this refrain. So I personally, I write because I feel I have to, and then one hopes that the poem or poems will be published, and it's like setting a paper boat out on a vast ocean, and you hope that sometime, somewhere, it will reach another shore, and I can't say more than that, really.
Yeah, I think that reaching another shore, and the fact that we don't always know, one poem could have had the most enormous impact on one person.
Mm.
That's, and that's more than enough, and we don't have to know about it, which is, I think a really, really interesting thing about the whole ethic of writing, really. Robin, what do you see as the role of the poet today?
Well, I think what I'd say about it is I think it's important for poets not to take themselves too seriously. So, I mean, Auden said poetry makes nothing happen. I think he's right, but I think he's also referring to some people who think it might have something to say. Well, uh, I, I think if you embark on a poem thinking, oh, I'm going to tell people about this, that, and the other. I mean, poets are no more intelligent or knowledgeable than anybody else. They they may be good at writing poems, but that doesn't mean that they can pronounce on matters of morality or whatever, politics. So I agree. I think with what John was saying there, that you send it out into the world and then you wave goodbye to it, and people can make of it what they like, and they may well make out something of it which has got nothing at all with the intention of the poet.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, Edward.
So yeah, I think it's quite hard to talk about the role of the poet, but I do absolutely agree with John that you're compelled to write. And that could be motivated by politics, it could be motivated by lots of different things. I think, I maybe 20 years ago, before we had the rise of social media and the overall internet, I think people possibly thought that poetry was in a state of crisis. We know it's not terribly easy to publish. But I have to say that the internet has enabled us to find all sorts of groups and communities of writers and poets all over the world, have contact with people we never thought we would ever have. I mean, one of my friends is the Chinese poet Wang Ao, and he approached me because he was trying to translate Wallace Stevens into Chinese. So we exchanged quite a lot of emails. And then we got to know each other, although we were living in completely different parts of the world. He was working in the States and I was in China. And we wrote poems about each other. And none of that would have been possible unless we were going down a sort of epistolary route and sending letters or something like that. It was, I guess, possible in the past. But the point I'm trying to make is that whilst, yes, of course, there is disinformation, there's worries over AI and what it will be, what it can have the power to do, and so forth. I think we also need not to lose sight of the connections that can be afforded by technology. And I think this was particularly the case during COVID, right? When people couldn't see each other, but were able to make use of various forms of technology to launch poetry books, to share all sorts of experiences, to be together. So I think that role, there's not a single role for the poet, obviously, and that's something personal that each poet finds her way with or his way. But I think that in face of massive disinformation and assault on truth that we're seeing to a very alarming degree across the world, then I feel that poetry is going to be in a good place because poets are definitely going to be compelled to write, just as other artists and will express themselves in different ways. So not a single role, but one that will adapt, I think, and change with technology as it did during modernism, the early 20th century and after. So it's about adaptation, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. We've had just, a brilliant discussion, and I'm going to ask each of you to read a final poem. Robin, do you want to kick us off with a final?
Right. Well, I'd like to, if I can find it, I'd like to read the title poem of the book. The Doll's House Maker's Room. In the doll's house maker's room, the cabinet of drawers where all the secrets stay, the table where the maker does his work, a sun hat for venturing out of doors, the piece he is at work on, whiskey for when his work is done. The piece he works on, a doll's house-sized wicker basket suitable for holding in the crook of a doll's arm and very neatly made, the willow soaked and bent and weaved so tight that water can't get through. Nor will it spill if the basket is tipped, if the doll tips it, say, while she is gathering flowers, or curtsying, or adjusting her hat. The secret of its making is in the cabinet, a tiny compartment, firmly shut within a drawer that's tightly closed. Nor is there room on his table for all the maker's tools and all his other needs, the bowls for water, the stacks of willow, the horse-bone glue, the paint, brushes and knives, pieces of wood and metal, wheel balancing machines, gingham. And not just gingham, there's silk, cotton of various kinds, and candlewick. No room, and yet space for it all. And this is the place, generous, confined, where he cuts, paints, polishes, fixes, and makes walls, roofs, floors, stairways, chimneys, hobs, windows, doors, carpets, tables and chairs, beds, bookshelves, books, curtains and pictures, dolls and their clothes, their necklaces and rings, bureaus where work is done, cabinets for secrets, baskets for crooks of arms, glasses, a bottle that's opened every day and shared with the doll's house maker whose sun hat, hanging where the door should be, is never used. Thank you.
Dan, you're muted.
Oh, it's me that's muted. Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. John, would you like to give us a final poem?
Yeah, sure. Another section from the book. Here I want to record Mrs. Rowland's North Street, one of the town's marginalia for sure. Her goiter a lifebelt, holding her head above water. Her loneliness reflected in the mirrors. Death is one of the more resilient commodities. What is it trading at today? I have a Glock for personal use, said the would-be President of the United States. And if anyone breaks into my home, I'll blow them away. But then there are babies, little masterful Buddhas, sitting up in prams with unfocused eyes, splashing with their hands if happy. They have no future because the future does not exist. Also no past, with its vanishing point in row after row of military graves. People crowded round the well of happiness. No water here, no water, somebody cried. And they shouldered their bundles and packs, headed for the stark brown black mountains, the barren rockiness of St. Mary's Vale, following the trail of what had been Nantiago. Water, they found, was all they wanted as they crossed the parchment of the Hrolben, reading the hieroglyphs of its withered oaks. My ghosts mean nothing to you, and your ghosts mean nothing to me, though we meet in open boats, adrift on the greasy swell of the sea. Being ordinary, and not a fiery wasp, that's a good thing, is it not?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Edward, do you want to finish off?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen to read the final poem here, if I can find it. This is a poem called The Equations of Dahlias. And the reason I particularly want to put it on screen is you can see that the poem is constructed really as a sort of verbal Fibonacci sequence. Dahlias are like a number of other things in nature, follow the order in terms of the petals of a Fibonacci sequence, which doubles itself by every new part of the equation, so to speak. So I realized when writing this that the numbers of words in each line reflect the number involved, and so this was partly inspired by an actual dahlia garden. I do quite a lot of work in Australia as part of my career in wine, and in the botanical gardens in Adelaide, there's actually a beautiful triangular garden of dahlias of all different species and kinds. And that's mentioned actually in the first poem in the book, which is called Botanical. So I'll read this. It's called The Equations of Dahlias. It is a love poem. If I can also see it. Okay. The Equations of Dahlias. How I want to dive inside you, but your spiraling Fibonacci grace of enfolding petals is the most golden ratio of more than I can attempt, and duplicates my work as you digest the whole of me, my love, so that I cannot plunge inside you, as your beauty has already enraptured the space between where I am and what would have been a diver's uncertain springboard into bliss. For you are ahead of me, covering my body with each petal-soft caress, so that I feel there are no words left. Even though you inspire me, my unblemished inspiration, breathing into me your exactest, gentlest, and softest speech, denying I may only have 26 words left, though we love like 26-year-olds, 21 at heart, perhaps. And maybe hyphenation can save us if the nature of our embrace is to be equal, equally, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Huge thanks to John and Robin and Edward. And I'm just going to briefly share the screen again with the code. So if you do want to go and look at those wonderful books, Wonder 26, when you're checking out, will get you 20% off all the books in the basket. So, you know, we had our 20th anniversary last year, and there are very, very few tiny presses of you know, run by one or two people like we are, that make it to 20 years old. And it's such a joy, and it is because we have incredible readers and incredibly supportive poets and fiction writers and creative non-fiction writers, you know, because Cinnamon has become a community, that we are still here. So thank you all for being here on a Sunday afternoon. It is very, very much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your day, depending on how much of your day you've got left. Probably not so much if you're over in China, and quite a bit more if you're on the other side of the world. But thank you especially to John Barney and Robin Thomas and Edward Ragg. And goodbye for now.
Thank you, Jan.